the Global Tropical Review for May the 21st, 2023. As is always the case in these videos, the plastic special are mine alone, and if you're looking for local information to you, and official information at that, look for your local weather office or local tropical cyclone warning center. So across the West Pacific today, the big story is Tropical Storm Mawar, which has formed in the past 24 hours in the open West Pacific, and you can see it here as the sun rises over the region. It looks pretty healthy right now with real good anticyclonic outflow towards the north there, and you can also see persistent deep convection sustaining over the area of low pressure. If you look at the low level flow, you can see the general turning of the westerly winds on the south side, and this wraps in on the eastern side, giving us a general location of an area of low pressure underneath this blob of convection here. And this system will likely be a significant issue for the Mariana Islands as we go into next week, or I should say this week, depending on how you structure your weeks. But the point is, we're looking at a potential significant typhoon threat for the islands, stretching from, say, Guam all the way up to Saipan and Tinian, and even areas further north. Now, immediately, we're going to start looking at model guidance as we have a general good idea on how the system is going to evolve over the next couple of days. There's very favorable conditions in place. If I get a sounding from the GFS, you can see as of right now, or from the analysis from the model, there is a little bit of shear, but this system is a little bit big, so that shear shouldn't really be too much of an issue. And alongside that, you can see the turning flow aloft. The winds there are still fairly weak, and everything else seems to be go for this system to intensify. The sea surface temperatures are very warm and deep at that. There's not any moisture issues you can see throughout the entire troposphere. There are no moisture issues at all. And overall, wind shear is not too strong. It's not detrimental to the storm. So as the system develops, or continues to develop rather, we are expecting some more intensification. And we have seen guidance continue to depict over the past couple of days that this system could get quite strong before this system actually gets to the Mariana Islands. Here's the GFS run. This is about 3 days out, so this is Tuesday in UTC time. So this will probably be Wednesday local time, and you can see that's a pretty significant storm coming through the islands there. And if we look at the European, I'll go to where you can see the actual intensity. You can see by 3 days as well. It is a little bit more north and a little bit more quicker, but you can still see there a potential typhoon coming through Mariana Islands in earlier in the week, probably Monday. You'd probably have time to finish your preparations, but Tuesday and Wednesday look to be the worst days for impacts from the system. Jumping immediately to the official forecast from the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, you can see they're expecting a typhoon to come through here, and you can see the current track does take this very close to Guam, but notice how large the cone is. You could absolutely get this storm tracking anywhere from south of Guam to north of Saipan and Tinian. You can see just that spread. And another thing to remember with these cones, I always say this with forecast cones like this, these are cones showing the potential track errors. Typically, these are showing where could the center be deviated from the exact track based on an average error that we have. This does not show the impact, the wide impact that the system could bring. Just as an example, look at the tropical storm force winds. It's not too big right now, but we do expect this storm to get more organized and stronger, and typically with that you get a more symmetrized, I don't know if that's a word, but a more symmetric area of strong winds, and that also grows as the storm strengthens. This system is expected to be a little bit big, so you will likely feel impacts in a lot of the Mariana Islands despite not being exactly where the center may go. So this is again a track cone, not an impact cone. So I'd say everyone in the Mariana Islands need to be watching Mawar. If you're on the northern side of the island chain, you should be, for the most part, good. You aren't expected really to get too much significant impacts, though you could get some surf impacts. But especially if you're in Guam up to Tinian and Saipan, and areas even further north than that, be preparing for a typhoon here, as it does appear that this may be a significant typhoon threat. Now, we're not expecting a super typhoon out of this per se, but we do still expect significant intensification here. Here's another graphic of that cone, and this shows the wind field, how wide the swath can be. And remember, I talked about how small the wind field is right now, but it's going to be growing with time. And there is a good depiction of it. You can see if the center's here in the middle of the islands of Guam and Rota, you could still be having typhoon force winds in Guam and all over the island of Rota. And even then, you could have strong tropical storm force winds potentially extending all the way maybe up towards Tinian and Saipan. It's the main driving home thing I want to put out here is that, sure, you may not be getting the direct hit, but you will certainly get some significant impacts well away from the center of circulation. And alongside that, where this system comes in, especially where that eye is, you could expect significant storm surge and very strong winds. As for those in the Mariana Islands looking to prepare, you have today, Sunday, and tomorrow, Monday, to prepare. You really need to have your preparations done by, I'd say, Monday evening. This is the earliest reasonable time to expect the arrival of tropical storm force winds, and this shows some areas could experience some of the winds starting around 8 o'clock on Monday night. And you can already see here that odds are quite high, going towards 60 and 70% for a good chunk of the Mariana Islands. And you can see pretty much the entire island chain has a chance, the significant chance of 30%. It goes quite far north as well, even north of Saipan and Tinian. So there's significant potential for significant weather, but the good news is this system will be quick after it goes through. We will not have to deal with it in the Mariana Islands as we go towards the mid to latter part of the week. But the system will not be done after. This does feel like we're tracking a storm in more peak season of August and September, but this system is likely not to go fully away, as the pattern is going to evolve as the system comes north. If we look at the pattern as the system comes towards the Mariana Islands, this seems like a pretty standard pattern to recurve a storm in the West Pacific. You've got a large-scale trough here over Japan alongside a big subtropical ridge here. Typically, what you'd expect in this, and this would be able to pull the storm north and funnel it between the trough and the ridge, and you would get that storm to recurve. That would be the case if this pattern was not evolving with time, and unfortunately, we are not expecting these troughs here to really do anything. Really, they're helping the system gain latitude, but after that, they're going to go away, and then we're going to get ridge development towards the north, and you can see that take place on the GFS. This larger scale feature of the trough moves towards Alaska, and this short wave here, this cutoff here, it starts to weaken as it also moves north as another ridge builds over Japan. And as we go towards 5 days, now we've got a pattern where this system cannot come more north. We've got a strong, and unusually strong for this time of year, subtropical ridge position right over Japan. And in this type of pattern, you really are only expecting this storm to recurve back towards the west. Now, you're going to see a lot of model runs, I'm sure, over the next several days that are going to depict this storm being a big storm for the Philippines, big storms for Taiwan, China, South Korea, and Japan. There is a ton of uncertainty, and that's really why I'm bringing this up, and I want to bring up the amount of uncertainty we have. This is 7 days out on the model, and you can see in this type of pattern, we have a ridge here. So you'd expect, if this holds, that the system would come towards Taiwan and the Philippines, and that would be all set in stone. But there are other factors here. There's a developing trough north of the ridge. Models are showing this decaying this subtropical ridge over Japan. That could easily cause the system to recurve. But the question is, where is the storm? And there's a bit of a spread on where this system could go. And the GFS solution is trying to develop a storm here off the coast of the Philippines in the South China Sea. And what happens is these areas of low pressure are close enough to where they start dancing around each other, or in what's called the Fujiwara effect. where both will sort of dance around each other in a counterclockwise fashion in the northern hemisphere, and they will, in this type of scenario, this storm will try and pull Mawar more towards the west, closer to the Philippines and Taiwan. Now, the question is, how strong is this next system in the South China Sea? Is it able to do this? Is it able to pull this further west to where it stays more underneath this subtropical ridge and doesn't get caught by this trough so much? You can see as I go ahead on the GFS, the ridge breaks down, but it doesn't matter. Mawar has already gotten far enough west to where it's still feeling the effects of this subtropical ridge now over South Korea, to where eventually on the model, it waited too long, and now that trough starts to move out, and you get an additional subtropical ridge development, and this pushes it into Taiwan and China. Alternatively, you could see this South China Sea system not come as strong. Here is the European model. You can see very similar pattern as the GFS. This large-scale trough over Japan starts to weaken and move out. This subtropical ridge develops over Japan. And notice how in the European, here we are at day 7, there's not really anything in the South China Sea. The Euro tries to develop a weak area of low pressure by Vietnam, but it never becomes really anything too strong, so you don't really get that tugging force from that storm trying to pull Mawar further west. So in reality, this ridge starts to break down from this trough, and Mawar on the European starts to round this ridge and come towards South Korea and Japan. And of course, that's only 2 scenarios out of various that exist right now. Here's the GFS ensemble mean at day 7. And this is in this area that I'm circling here. This is all areas where Mawar could potentially be at 7 days. This position has a whole lot of implications. It depends on where does Mawar go and who gets what. If you've got a storm on the southern side, you could be looking at a Philippines threat. If you've got a storm on the northern side, you could potentially be looking at maybe a storm that maybe gets close to the Japanese islands, but then immediately curbs out to sea as this trough starts to erode the ridge. In the center of this, it can go either way. You saw in the European, it had a scenario where it rounded the ridge because the South China Sea system really didn't develop. But on the GFS, the South China Sea system developed, and it tracked towards Taiwan and got caught by a subtropical ridge eventually and went into Taiwan. There's a lot of implications here, and this is just a fraction of how many possible solutions there are. I think a good way to illustrate how much uncertainty there is just looking at the ensemble tracks. This is a map showing all of the GFS ensemble members and the possible solutions that all of these have in mind. Notice the massive spread here. You have solutions, like I said, by the Philippines, and you've got solutions curving out east of Japan. The hope would be that the northern solution verifies out of this and we end up getting a storm that ends up recurving east of Japan, but we cannot guarantee that this happens. And here's, for comparison, here's the Canadian, and you can see it's the same mess of spaghetti that we just had on the GFS ensembles. And this is just illustrating well, I feel, the amount of uncertainty there is. So for those in Japan, in Taiwan, and China, and in the Philippines, just don't panic, of course. This system is still over 7 days out, but it is highly recommended that you pay close attention to Mawar, as it does look like there is a significant potential for the system to come your way after it passes to the Mariana Islands. Where exactly it goes, who gets what, those are details we can figure out in later time, but the most important thing is making sure your typhoon preparedness kit is ready just in case you have to enact it. We're getting into the time of year where these storms will become a little more common. It's more into typhoon season. So you need to make sure that your kits are ready just in case you have to deal with a typhoon at some point. And in the Mariana Islands, again, you have today, Sunday, and tomorrow, Monday, really to prepare. Your preparations should be done by Monday evening. Here's that earliest reasonable wind arrival window, and I'll zoom in here so you can see it even better. again, by Monday night, you could be seeing tropical storm force winds arrive, and those odds of getting them, especially in Guam, all the way up to Tinian and Saipan, they're quite significant. And again, here's that forecast cone showing a typhoon coming through the region. So I will leave a bunch of links. I will leave links to these graphics and to the Japan Meteorological Agency as well in the description. I will have further videos out as this system develops, and stay safe for everyone ahead of Tropical Storm Mawar.